Hi group. I want to first start out by apologizing for just now getting the vlog 7 done. I did not realize that I was the prompter this week. Obviously, I guess I just got a little off track last week with not having class and stuff, so that's my mistake. I apologize for that, and I sincerely hope that it didn't inconvenience you, or I hate that it did inconvenience you. So, we had a lot of readings, well, not a fair amount of reading this week, and our topic for this week is sociological perspectives on identity development and multiple dimensions of identity development. We were to skim over chapter 13 from Evans. So I'm going to start with that. And in the beginning of Evans, in our green book, it did a great job of outlining the social identity models, basically for the last 50 years in the United States. And it did a great job of putting them in it was a timeline basically of going through chronological order. And so I encourage you, if you didn't really look or you just kind of skimmed over this, just to go back and kind of jot it down, because it really helped me looking at some of the past models that we've looked at and just putting them in order. I'm a visual person, so it really helped me to put them in order and to look, and it kind of just put them in place for me. But it did a good job of outlining these, and it really, the readings more so picked up at the multiple identities, overlapping influences and formations, and these were more in, this picked up in the 90s, late 90s and 2000. And it looked at Reynolds and Pope was the first one it kind of identified in 1991, and their theory dealt more with, or their model looked more at oppression, and it was called the multi-dimensional identity model. MIM is the acronym for that, and it examined the complexity of multiple oppressions derived from multiple identities, and it is a non-linear model. So it did a good job of looking at Reynolds and Pope, and then the timeline it really moved on. It looked at privilege after concentrating on oppression, and then it looked at Jones and McEwen's nonlinear model of multiple dimensions of identity, and which we'll talk a little bit later on this when I talk about one of the articles that we were to read. But basically it centered around the identity is the core sense of self and personal identity. Surrounding core is the context within which identity occurs. And then there's intersecting circles surrounding the core of the identity. And there's significant identity dimensions such as race, culture, gender, family, education, sexual orientation, social class, and religions. And then the dots located by the intersecting circles represent importance of identity dimensions to individuals. And the greater the dot to the core, which remember the core was the self, and then the intersecting circles are, and the greater the dots that are on the outside of the circles are to the core, the more important they are. They're identified as more important. So, and they really, Jones and McEwen, put out the first social identity model that relates to, well, I'll talk about that a little bit later. Then, and this is still coming from Evans chapter 13. And in the chapter there was a good point of, it made a statement in the book where it said individual identities are woven together to create a whole unique individual, not a person with separate, distinct, unrelated identity categories. And to me, that put it more in perspective, because it seems like sometimes when we look at the theories and models, and I know we've talked about this in class too, but it seems like it's more of a, they're separated, cognitive or psychosocial, or, you know, it seems like, whereas as this puts it more, is there are multiple identities for one person and one individual and one college student. So that was a skimming of the book of what I really pulled from that. And then now we're going to go over to, there were 3 articles in our reading this week. And the first one that I'm going to talk about is The Identity Construction, New Issues and New Directions by Karen Cerullo. And basically, this article it's an essay article that focuses on and explores the past works and the attention they had to individual sense of self when looking at identity forms. It looks at the past, but then it's the past works, but then it also, and it says that they were more focused on self, while more recent works of identity shift toward the collective of all, the collective works of, or the collective. The article pulls key works published and looks at the synthesizing of the past and the present works in social identity, and really at the end it focused on synthesizing all the information and pulling it together to be able to benefit students that we work with and work for the future concerns of them. So, but I'm not going to focus as much about that as the other 2 articles that we were to read and to focus on. And the first one I'm going to talk about is the conceptual framework for understanding race, class, gender, and sexuality. And this is by Lynn Weber from the University of South Carolina. And this one was interesting, and it seemed like it was easier to read also. But it looks at, the purpose of the article is to aid in teaching and research on race, class, gender, and sexuality. And what she does a good job of doing is she lays out the frameworks, and she presents 6 common themes that characterize this scholarship. And I'm just going to name them quickly and kind of go through of what each mean. And out of the 6, the first 5 common themes describe the way race, class, gender, and sexuality are conceptualized as systems of oppression. So number 1 is contextual. Race, class, gender, and sexuality are contextual. They're never fixed, but constantly undergoing change as part of new economic, political processes, trends, and events. The second theme is that they are all socially constructed, and whose meaning develops out of group struggles over socially valued resources. The dominant culture defines the categories with race, gender, and sexuality as polar opposites. For example, men, women, right, wrong, that would be your polar opposites. The third theme is systems of power relationships, and Weber identifies this as the single most important theme. And basically they are power relationships. So, and basically what it's saying is power hierarchies in which one group exerts control over another, securing its position in dominance in the system. Number 4, the 4th theme is social structural, which is the macro, and social psychological, which is the micro. And it highlights that race, class, gender, and sexuality are embedded and have meaning at micro level of the individual's everyday lives and macro level of community and social institutions, and that they are intertwined. The fifth theme is simultaneously expressed, and that states that race, class, gender, and sexuality simultaneously operates in every social situation, and they are connected. And then the sixth theme, and this final characteristic describes a common epistemology of race, class, gender, and sexuality scholarship. And the sixth theme is the interdependence of knowledge and activism. And basically it goes on to state the truth value of this knowledge depends on its ability to reflect back to social groups their experiences in such a way that can more effectively define, value, and empower themselves to seek social justice. So those are the six highlights, or the six themes of her study. And like I said, she basically presents all of this so we can use this in our research, and when we're talking about social identity and such. So, and in the classroom. The last article is the reconceptualizing the model of multiple dimensions of identity, the role of meaning-making capacity in the construction of multiple identities. That's a mouthful. And this is by Ames, Jones, and McEwen. And they are building off of the multiple dimensions of identity model by Jones and McEwen. I'm sorry, not by Jones and McEwen, Jones and McEwen. And what they do is they take their model, but they add the meaning model aspect, or the meaning making aspect to that. And Jones and McEwen's identity theory provided for the very first time a conceptual framework for understanding relationships among students' personal and socially constructed identities. And the reconceptualized model, it takes that, but it adds the meaning making by integrating students' interpersonal, cognitive, and interpersonal domains of development. In other words, what they have done in layman's terms is it provides a richer portrayal of not only what relationships students perceive among their personal and social identities, but also how they come to perceive them as they do. The making meaning neither predicts nor prescribes relative salience or the nature of the relationships among social identities, but it does provide one explanation for how students perceive their identities as they do, how they perceive themselves, basically, and their relationships, and how it's all interwoven. The reconceptualized model is one of the few models of holistic development in the student development theory. So not only does it take, a lot of the models we look at maybe only look at the cognitive portion of the student's development, or the social identity development, but this reconceptualized model is a holistic development, which it takes all aspects and it puts it together, and it's one of the few models that does this. And I like toward the end of the article by Ames, Jones, and McEwen, they have a good example of, because I always try to put it as, how does this apply to me, and how would this apply to us as student affairs professionals, and how could we use this? And it had a good